In most towns, names fade into memory like dust on old roads. But in Ridgewater, one name refused to fade. They didn't call her by her real name anymore. They called her Trouble. She was 15 years old when the pattern began to form around her life. The kind of pattern nobody notices until it's already too late to stop it. A girl walking home alone too often. A girl seen arguing in places she shouldn't have been. A girl whose silence, when it came, felt heavier than her voice ever did. But before the rumors, before the reports, before the case file existed, Trouble was just Tara Lennox. Ridgewater was the kind of town where nothing officially happened, even when everything was happening. A single high school, 2 main roads, a police station that doubled as a community center on weekends, and behind all of it, quiet pressure. Everyone knew everyone, and more importantly, everyone thought they knew everything. That's why Tara stood out. Not because she was loud, but because she didn't belong to anyone's version of normal. 15 years old, average height, thin frame, dark braided hair, usually tied loosely, like she didn't care how it looked by the end of the day. Teachers described her the same way, bright but detached. Classmates described her differently. She looks like she knows something she shouldn't. But the truth was simpler. Tara wasn't dangerous. She was observant. And in Ridgewater, that was often mistaken for something worse. It started with a missing phone. A senior student claimed Tara had taken it. No evidence, no witnesses. Just a claim that spread faster than facts ever could. By the next day, the hallway already had a nickname for her. Trouble. Not because anything was proven, but because rumors don't wait for proof. And once a label sticks in a small town, it becomes easier to believe the label than the person. Tara's school counselor noted something important in her file. Declining attendance, refusal to speak in sessions, sudden withdrawal from group activities. But none of it triggered intervention. Because in Ridgewater, problems were often treated as phases, and phases were expected to pass on their own. But Tara didn't pass anything. She simply moved differently through the world after that point. It was a Friday. Cold air, early darkness, light rain that never fully became a storm. Tara left school at 3:42 p.m. Security cameras confirmed it. She was last seen walking past the old bus stop near Hollow Street. After that point, there are only fragments. A neighbor reporting she saw her near the river path. A text message sent from her phone at 4:11 p.m. "I'm almost home." But she never arrived. At 4:26 p.m., Tara's phone stopped transmitting. No calls, no location pings, no movement after that timestamp. Her mother reported her missing at 8:03 p.m. At first, police treated it as a runaway case, 15 years old, recent behavioral issues, no forced entry at home. But something didn't fit, because Tara had left her school bag behind, and she never went anywhere without it. Search teams started along the river path. It was the logical route. Cameras near Hollow Street were reviewed, and that's where the first inconsistency appeared. A blurred figure. Walking in the opposite direction Tara should have gone. Not running, not panicked, just walking. Calm, too calm, and not alone. Detective Mark Ellison, assigned to the case, later said, "We didn't think we had a kidnapping at first. We thought we had a disappearance with gaps. But then the gaps started multiplying. Because within 24 hours, a witness changed their statement, a second phone ping appeared and disappeared instantly. A local vehicle was reported near the river path without plate clarity and Tara Lennox. stopped being treated as a runaway. She became a missing person under suspicious circumstances. By the end of the first day, Ridgewater had a problem. It didn't know how to name properly, because once they stopped calling her Tara and started calling her Trouble, it became harder to see her as someone who could be saved, and easier to imagine she was already gone. By the second day of Tara Lennox's disappearance, Ridgewater stopped pretending this was routine, because timelines, when they're clean, tell a story. But Tara's timeline didn't tell a story. It broke apart the moment investigators tried to follow it. Detective Mark Ellison started with the basics. 3:42 p.m. Tara leaves school 3:48 p.m. Seen walking past Carter's grocery. 3:56 p.m. Camera footage near Hollow Street bus stop. 4:11 p.m. Text sent. I'm almost home. 4:26 p.m. Phone goes dead. On paper, it looked simple. But in reality, something was wrong. Because the route from school to Tara's house took no more than 15 minutes. Even walking slowly, even stopping along the way. Which meant by 4:11 p.m., when she sent that message, she should have already been home. The area behind Hollow Street led to a narrow trail known locally as the River Path. It wasn't part of Tara's usual route, but it was known for two things: shortcuts through wooded areas and blind spots where cameras didn't reach search teams. Combed the path early that morning. At first they found nothing. Then, just past a bend where the trees thickened, they found disturbance in the ground. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough to suggest movement that didn't match a normal walk. Half buried near the edge of the trail, a single sneaker, black, worn, size matched to Tara. But what stood out wasn't the shoe. It was how it was found, not thrown, not scattered, placed, carefully angled as if someone had set it there intentionally. Ellison didn't say it publicly, but in his internal notes, one line stood out. This was not a struggle that escalated. This was something controlled. Because chaotic abductions leave chaos behind. This didn't. This looked deliberate. A woman named Clara Hensley, who lived near Hollow Street, had initially told police she saw Tara walking alone. But on the second interview, her story shifted. She hesitated, paused longer than before, then said something different. I think someone was walking behind her. That detail hadn't been mentioned the first time. When asked why, Clara said, I didn't think it mattered. But it did. Because now Tara wasn't alone. Another report came in around the same time. A delivery driver claimed he saw a dark-colored SUV parked near the trail entrance around 4 p.m. Engine off. No driver visible. At first, it sounded like nothing. But when investigators checked traffic cams 2 blocks away, they found something. A vehicle matching that description passed through at 3:51 p.m., but it never showed up leaving the area. Then came the detail that shifted the case completely. At 4:18 p.m., 7 minutes after Tara's last text, there was a brief, partial signal ping from her phone. Not near the river path, not near her home, but from a tower on the north side of Ridgewater, a direction Tara would never have taken. Now the timeline looked like this. She walks toward home, sends a message saying she's almost there as possibly followed, ends up near the river path. Her shoe appears placed, not lost, and her phone briefly pings miles away. It didn't connect, not naturally, not logically, unless something happened between 3:56 p.m. and 4:11 p.m. that no one had seen. The investigation needed a starting point, and it found one in someone no one expected to matter. Evan Rourke, 17 years old, senior at Ridgewater High. Previously accused of theft, the same incident tied to Tara weeks earlier. The missing phone. The accusation that gave her the nickname. Trouble. At the time, nothing was proven, but now, detectives had a reason to revisit it. Because Evan's statement had one detail that didn't match anyone else's. He claimed, "I didn't see her after school that day." But camera footage showed otherwise. At 3:44 p.m., just seconds after Tara exited the building, Evan walked out behind her. It wasn't enough to charge him, but it was enough to question him again. Because now there was a possible link, a past accusation, a shared timeline, and a disappearance with no clear cause. By nightfall, Ridgewater had changed. Searchlights replaced streetlights. Parents kept their children indoors, and conversations lowered into whispers. Because something about this case didn't feel random, it felt targeted. Why Tara? Why that day? And why did every piece of evidence feel like it was placed just enough to be found? By the end of the second day, the case had moved beyond a simple disappearance. Because now there were signs of planning control and misdirection, and the name Trouble was starting to feel less like a rumor and more like something someone wanted the town to believe. By the third day, the case had a direction, not a solution, not clarity, but a direction. And it led straight to someone who, under normal circumstances, wouldn't have stood out. But nothing about this case was normal anymore. 17 years old, quiet, well-known, the kind of student teachers trusted without question. No record of violence, no history of disciplinary issues beyond minor infractions. On paper, Evan Rourke was the opposite of the kind of person investigators look for. But cases don't follow paper, they follow pressure. And when pressure was applied, Evan didn't react the way most people do. Evan arrived at the station with his father just after noon. He didn't ask why he was there, didn't ask what this was about. He already knew. That alone made Detective Ellison take notice, because most teenagers, innocent or not, ask questions. Evan didn't. He just sat down, hands still, posture straight, eyes steady, too steady. Ellison kept it simple at first. "When was the last time you saw Tara Lennox?" Evan didn't hesitate. "Earlier that week." A clean answer, but a wrong one, because the footage said otherwise. Ellison slid a still image across the table. Time-stamped, 3:44 p.m. Tara walking out. Evan behind her, close enough to follow. For a moment, just a moment, Evan paused. Not visibly shaken, not nervous, but delayed. And in interrogations, delays matter. Because truth tends to come quickly. It's lies that need time. "Okay, yeah, I saw her leaving school." No apology, no explanation for the earlier contradiction, just an adjustment. Like he was correcting a detail that didn't matter. Ellison shifted focus. "Let's talk about the phone. The one you said she took." Evan leaned back slightly. First physical change since entering the room. "I never said she took it. I said it was missing." That wasn't entirely true. Multiple students reported he had named Tara directly when the phone disappeared. And within hours, the nickname Trouble had spread. Evan never denied disliking her. He just reframed it, minimized it, redirected it. And every answer had the same structure. Technically accurate, emotionally empty, strategically incomplete. Ellison moved to the critical point. "Where were you between 3:45 and 4:30 p.m.? Evan answered immediately. Home. Too fast, too certain. Evan's house was on the north side of Ridgewater, the same area where Tara's phone briefly pinged at 4:18 p.m. Anyone confirm that? My dad. I got home around 4. That created a narrow window, because if Evan left school at 3:44 p.m. and got home around 4, that left just enough time for something to happen in between. Ellison didn't respond immediately. He just let the silence sit, because silence forces people to fill it. And when they do, they reveal what matters to them. Evan didn't rush to fill it, he just waited. Calm, controlled. Then Evan said something that shifted the room. You're not going to find anything on the river path. Ellison looked up. That information had not been made public. The location hadn't been released. Only internal teams knew where evidence had been found. Why would you say that? Evan blinked once, then answered, just guessing. That's where people usually check first. It sounded reasonable, but it came too precisely, too directly. At that moment, Evan stopped being just a person of interest. He became something more complicated. Not obviously guilty, but not clean, not unaware, and definitely not surprised. Investigators shifted to another angle. Do you know anyone with a dark SUV? Evan shrugged. A lot of people do. Another technically true answer, another non-answer. By the end of the interrogation, one thing was clear. Evan wasn't breaking. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't even defensive. He was managing the conversation. And that made him dangerous in a way that wasn't easy to prove. A search warrant for Evan's phone was processed that evening. And when digital forensics pulled his location data, they found something that didn't match his statement. At 4:12 p.m., his phone briefly connected to a tower near the river path. At 4:15 p.m., his phone was powered off. Now there were 2 phones. Tara's pinging north at 4:18 p.m., Evan's going dark at 4:15 p.m. near the river 3 minutes apart, moving in opposite directions. By that night, word spread. Not officially, but fast. Evan Rourke was being questioned. And just like that, the narrative changed. Because now, the same town that once labeled Tara as trouble started looking for trouble somewhere else. If Evan was involved, why was everything so controlled? Why leave a shoe? Why allow a phone ping miles away? Why create a timeline that almost made sense, but not quite? By the end of the 3rd day, investigators weren't just chasing a suspect. They were chasing a structure, a sequence of events that felt designed, not just to hide the truth, but to reshape it. By the 4th day, the investigation stopped asking who and started asking how, because nothing about Tara Lennox's disappearance followed the pattern of a rushed act. Everything, every detail felt positioned, measured, almost rehearsed. The shoe found near the river path was sent for full forensic analysis. At first glance, it seemed simple. Tara's shoe, separated during movement. But under closer inspection, that theory didn't hold. There were no drag marks nearby, no signs of a fall, no scuff patterns suggesting a struggle. And most importantly, the sole of the shoe was too clean. If Tara had been pulled, chased, or forced off the path, the shoe would show it. Dirt packed into the grooves, grass stains, pressure distortions. But this one didn't. It looked like it had been placed after the fact. Forensics pulled fibers from inside the shoe. Not unusual, but the type of fibers didn't match Tara's clothing. Instead, they matched synthetic upholstery material, the kind used in vehicle interiors, that single detail shifted the working theory, because now investigators had reason to believe Tara wasn't taken violently on the trail. She may have been inside a vehicle before the shoe was ever left behind, which meant the river path wasn't the scene of the event. It was part of the story someone wanted told. Digital analysts turned their attention back to Tara's last message. "I'm almost home." At first it felt normal, routine. But when they examined typing patterns, something didn't match. Tara's previous messages, hundreds of them, showed a pattern. She used abbreviations, rarely typed full sentences, often skipped punctuation. But the final message, it was fully spelled, clean, structured, different. Experts concluded something subtle but critical. The message is consistent with her vocabulary, but not her behavior. In other words, it sounded like something she would say, but not something she would type like that. That raised a question investigators couldn't ignore. Did Tara actually send that message? Or did someone else send it? To buy time? While investigators were still focused on Evan Rourke, another name quietly surfaced. Not through rumor, not through accusation, but through something much harder to ignore. Repeated presence. 24 years old. Part-time tutor at Ridgewater High. Known for working with students who struggled academically, including Tara Lennox. School records showed Tara had attended 3 private tutoring sessions with Lena in the past month. Nothing unusual, until they checked location data. Because Lena's phone placed her within 2 blocks of Hollow Street at 4:05 p.m. That was 6 minutes before Tara's final message, and 13 minutes before the second phone ping. When questioned, Lena was calm, cooperative, clear. "I was driving home from a session. I take Hollow Street sometimes, it's faster." Everything she said made sense on the surface. Investigators asked one simple question. "Did you see Tara that day?" Lena paused. Not long, but long enough. No. Because now there were 3 people tied to the same window of time. Tara, Evan, Lena, all within minutes, all near the same location, and all with statements that didn't fully align. When investigators pulled security footage from a nearby intersection, they found something subtle. At 4:07 p.m., a dark SUV passed through. Not clearly identifiable, but one detail stood out. A small crack across the lower right corner of the windshield. Lena Caldwell owned a dark SUV, and weeks earlier, she had filed a repair inquiry for a cracked windshield. At this point, the case stopped being about coincidence, because coincidence doesn't repeat this precisely. Now there were overlapping elements. A staged piece of evidence, a manipulated message. 2 individuals connected by proximity, and a vehicle possibly linking them both. Detective Ellison wrote a new working line in his notes. More than one person involved, coordinated, not impulsive. If this was coordinated, then what was the motive? Because nothing in Tara's life suggested wealth conflict or anything worth planning this carefully for, unless the motive wasn't about what Tara had, but what she knew. By the end of the 4th day, the case had expanded beyond a single suspect. Now it was something more complex, more controlled, and more deliberate than anyone in Ridgewater wanted to believe. Because if 2 people were involved, then this wasn't a moment. It was a plan. By the 5th day, the case stopped expanding outward and started collapsing inward. Because the more investigators pulled on loose threads, the more everything led back to one place. Not the river path, not the school, but something far quieter. Something that until now had seemed completely harmless. Lena agreed to return voluntarily. No lawyer, no resistance. Same calm demeanor. But this time the questions were different, more specific, less forgiving. How often did you meet with Tara? A few times. She needed help catching up. With what? General coursework. Vague. Too vague. Because school records showed something more precise. Tara wasn't failing. She wasn't struggling academically, so why tutoring? Detective Ellison placed a folder on the table. Inside, timestamps location pings a still image of Lena's SUV. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. Why were you near Hollow Street at 4:05 p.m.? Lena didn't hesitate this time. I told you I was driving home. From where? A pause, slightly longer than before. From a session? With who? And that's where the structure broke. Because for the first time, Lena didn't have a clean answer ready. There was no scheduled tutoring session that day. Not with Tara, not with any student. Which meant Lena had been in that area for a reason she hadn't disclosed. Ellison leaned forward, voice steady. We know you were there. We know your vehicle matches. And we know Tara never made it home. Silence. Then, a subtle shift. Not panic, not fear, but something closer to calculation. You're building something that isn't there, all from different locations, but all featuring the same thing, sometimes parked, sometimes moving, sometimes idling near the school, near Hollow Street, near the river path. One video stood out, short, shaky, recorded from a distance, but clear enough. Inside the vehicle, two figures, one in the driver's seat, one in the passenger seat. The driver matched Lena Caldwell. The passenger took longer to confirm. But once enhanced, it aligned with someone investigators already knew. Now the case had structure. Not just overlapping timelines, not just suspicious behavior, but direct visual evidence placing Lena and Evan together, multiple times. Before Tara disappeared. Tara hadn't been a random target. She had been watching, recording, documenting, quietly collecting pieces of something she didn't fully understand, but knew wasn't right. Ellison slid a printed still frame across the table. Lena's face, inside the SUV, captured from Tara's device. Lena looked at it, and for the first time since the investigation began, she reacted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but visibly. Her breathing changed, her posture shifted, and the control she had maintained cracked. You don't understand what you're looking at. Because whatever Tara had found, it wasn't accidental, and it wasn't harmless. It was something that involved repeated meetings, careful movement, and a level of secrecy that required coordination. Detective Ellison updated the working case structure. Tara discovers something, begins documenting it. Becomes a liability, is intercepted before she can reveal it. If Tara was taken to stop what she knew, then why stage the scene? Why leave clues? Why risk exposure? Because this wasn't just about stopping Tara. It was about controlling what happened after she disappeared. By the end of the 5th day, the case was no longer about finding a missing girl. It was about uncovering what she had seen and why two people with no obvious connection had worked together to make sure she couldn't say it out loud. By the 6th day, the investigation stopped being about suspicion. Now it was about confirmation. Because for the first time, detectives weren't guessing anymore. They had proof that two people who had no reason to be connected had been meeting in secret, and a 15-year-old girl had been documenting it, right up until she vanished. This time, Evan didn't walk in with the same control. Not entirely. It was subtle, but noticeable. His shoulders were tighter, his responses shorter. Because now he knew what investigators had, or at least he knew they had something. Detective Ellison didn't start with questions. He started with evidence, a still image placed on the table. Lena Caldwell, inside the SUV, time-stamped. His eyes moved to the image, paused, then shifted away. No denial, no immediate explanation, just silence. How long have you known her? A simple question, but one that mattered. Not long, because the footage said otherwise. The recordings from Tara's device showed multiple encounters over 3 weeks, consistent, repeated, intentional. Ellison slid another still forward, this one clearer. Evan entering the passenger side of the SUV. Try again. This time Evan didn't answer immediately. His breathing slowed, controlled, but not steady. She helped me with something. He didn't deny knowing her. He adjusted the narrative, which meant the connection was real. Now the question was, what kind of help? What kind of something? This time the delay stretched, because whatever the answer was, it wasn't simple, just stuff, personal. In interrogation terms, vague answers signal risk. Not always guilt, but always concealment. While Evan was being questioned, digital forensics continued reviewing Tara's files. Frame by frame, audio cleaned, visuals enhanced. And what they found changed the direction of the case entirely. The meetings between Lena and Evan weren't random. They followed a pattern. Same locations, same time windows, same behavior. Short interactions, items exchanged. No prolonged conversation, no visible conflict. It wasn't a friendship, it wasn't tutoring, it wasn't anything normal, it looked like transactions. One recording, barely audible at first, was enhanced, and within it, a fragment of conversation emerged. Not complete, but enough. You said no one else knew. Lower. Controlled? They don't. That conversation happened 2 days before Tara disappeared, which meant by then, she was already watching them. Now investigators believed Tara discovered the meetings, began recording them. Possibly understood they were secret for a reason and became visible to the people she was watching. Ellison shifted approach. Less accusation, more precision. She saw you. Silence. Tara saw you with Lena. Still nothing, but this time Evan didn't look away. He stared at the table, fixed. And you knew that. Evan exhaled slowly. Not defensive, not angry, just resigned. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not a confession, but a shift. Because now, for the first time, Evan acknowledged Tara's presence, and that her presence was a problem. Tara didn't just disappear randomly, she intersected with something she wasn't meant to witness. Investigators rechecked traffic movement, reconstructed possible routes, and one path stood out. From Hollow Street to an abandoned service road leading north. Minimal surveillance, low traffic, and within a range of the tower that picked up Tara's final signal. An old maintenance property, unused, unregistered in recent years, but still structurally intact. It was isolated, quiet, and most importantly, controlled. Ellison leaned in, voice low, precise. Where did you take her? This time Evan didn't answer, didn't deflect, didn't reframe. He just sat there, still. Because it wasn't confusion, it wasn't denial, it was choice. By the end of the 6th day, investigators weren't asking if Tara had been taken. They were asking where. Because now they knew. She had seen something, she had been identified, and at least one person had acknowledged her presence. And somewhere beyond Ridgewater's quiet streets, there was a place where the timeline continued, even after she disappeared. By the 7th day, the investigation had a location, not confirmed, not guaranteed, but strong enough to act on, because when patterns repeat, vehicles, signals, silence, they don't lead nowhere. They lead somewhere quiet. It didn't have a name, not anymore. Old records listed it as a maintenance outpost tied to a water utility that shut down years ago. Since then, no registered owner activity, no utilities, no reason for anyone to be there, which made it exactly the kind of place investigators look for when something is meant to stay hidden. 2 units arrived just after 6:40 a.m. No sirens, no lights, just quiet movement along the dirt access road, because if someone had been using that location, they needed to know if it was still active. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Faded structure, broken fencing, overgrown brush pressing in from all sides. But abandonment has a pattern, and this didn't fully match it. Tire tracks, recent, not deep, but fresh enough to cut through the layer of settled dust, and more than one set. The door wasn't locked, which in itself wasn't unusual for a place like that. But what mattered was this: it wasn't stuck. It opened smoothly, as if it had been used recently. The air was still, but not stale. There's a difference. Stale air settles. This air felt disturbed, like the space had been occupied not long ago. A chair, positioned in the center of the room, not random, not discarded, placed, facing nothing in particular, just like the shoe, just like the message. Everything about this case had a sense of placement. A plastic container near the wall, inside, empty water bottles, food wrappers, disposable gloves, none of it old. None of it degraded. This wasn't a permanent operation. It was something used and cleared. Used again and cleared. Near the chair, investigators found faint impressions. Not clear enough to define immediately, but consistent enough to matter. Parallel lines. Repeated pressure. Something had been restrained there. Not violently, not chaotically, but securely. Forensics ran a quick check on signal overlap. The property sat directly within the range of the tower that picked up Tara's final phone ping at 4:18 p.m. If Tara had been taken from Hollow Street, she could have been at this location within minutes, which meant this wasn't just a possibility. It was the first place that made the entire timeline work. They found something else, something smaller, easier to miss. Under the edge of a rusted shelf, a small recording unit, damaged, partially broken, but not destroyed. Because Tara had been recording, and this device wasn't hers. The audio was fragmented, static, distorted, but within it, there were voices, calm, measured, recognizable. Lena Caldwell, lower, controlled. Evan Rourke, faint, strained, unsteady. The audio didn't capture everything, but it captured enough. You weren't supposed to see that. Silence. I didn't tell anyone. Her voice, Tara's. That's not the problem. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was already understood between them. Tara had seen something, and that alone had changed her position. While the property was being processed, Lena Caldwell was brought back in. This time, not voluntarily, no more vague answers, no more open-ended questions, just evidence. The fragment from the device, cleaned enough to identify voices, clear enough to remove doubt. Lena didn't speak immediately, didn't deny it, didn't try to explain it away. She just listened. You don't know the full context. Because now investigators had location, audio, connection, timeline, everything except one thing. By the 7th day, the structure was clear. Tara discovers something, records it, is confronted, is taken to a controlled location, and disappears from every known system. If this was about silencing Tara, why leave anything behind? Why risk recordings? Why allow any trail at all? Because whoever planned this wasn't just trying to hide the truth. They were controlling how it would be found. By the end of the 7th day, investigators had finally reached the place where Tara's story didn't stop. It continued without witnesses. And now the question wasn't just what happened to her. It was whether she was ever meant to be found at all. By the 8th day, the case reached the point every investigation eventually faces. The moment where silence becomes harder to maintain than the truth. Because now the evidence wasn't scattered anymore, it was aligned. And Lena Caldwell knew it. Interrogation rooms are designed for pressure, but real breaks don't come from the room. They come from realization. And Lena had reached hers. Detective Ellison didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't push. He just laid everything out, piece by piece, the footage, the vehicle, the recordings, the property. And then he said one thing. We already know what happened up to that point. A pause. Then, what we don't know is how it ended. Lena looked down at the table, fingers pressed together, breathing shallow, controlled, but not steady. It wasn't supposed to go like that. Not denial, not confusion, acknowledgement. Lena didn't start from the beginning. She started from the part she thought mattered most. She saw us, but she didn't understand what she was seeing. Because Tara had been recording for weeks, which meant this wasn't a one-time discovery. It was a pattern she had noticed. It wasn't random. It wasn't, what you think? Ellison didn't interrupt. Because when someone is trying to control a narrative, interruptions give them structure. Silence takes it away. Lena finally said it. He was moving things. Not clear at first, until she clarified. Information, devices, storage. Evan wasn't meeting Lena for tutoring. He was acting as a carrier, moving items between locations. Small, untraceable, difficult to connect. She wasn't just involved. She was organizing it. Because Evan didn't attract attention, good student. Clean record, invisible in the way investigators often overlook. She wasn't part of it. She was outside of it, observing, recording, connecting patterns no one else noticed. Ellison brought her back to it. The day she disappeared. She was closer than usual. Closer how? She followed us. That's when Tara stopped being a distant observer and became a direct risk. We confronted her. No hesitation now, no gaps, just a steady release of truth. At the trail near Hollow Street. That aligns with the last confirmed sighting. The blurred figure, the second presence. She said she wouldn't tell anyone, because in operations built on secrecy, intentions don't matter, exposure does. Lena's voice dropped slightly. We couldn't risk it. We told her to get in the car. Not forced, not violent, at least not at first, which explains the lack of struggle, the absence of chaos. Everything about this case returns to that word, control. We took her there. No denial, no hesitation. Ellison didn't rush the next question, because this was the line that mattered. Yes. Silence, longer than before, heavier. We were going to figure it out. There was no initial plan to kill her, only to contain the situation. Ellison leaned in slightly. Lena's composure slipped. Just enough. She didn't stop talking. Tara wasn't silent. She wasn't passive. She kept speaking, explaining, pushing. She said she had copies. Because if true, then taking Tara didn't solve the problem. It multiplied it. For the first time, control breaks. Because now, the risk isn't contained, the timeline tightens, the pressure increases. Her voice drops, barely above a whisper. It got out of control. She doesn't describe exactly what happened next, not yet, but she doesn't need to, because the direction is clear. By the end of the 8th day, investigators knew. Tara discovered a hidden operation. She documented it. She confronted the people involved. She was taken to silence the risk. And something inside that location escalated beyond control. The name Trouble was never about who Tara was. It was about what she became. To the wrong people at the wrong time. By the 9th day, the investigation reached the part of every case that changes everything. Not the search, not the suspicion, but the truth. Because now, both suspects were no longer protecting the same version of events. And when stories stop aligning, they start revealing what really happened. Evan's second session had cracks, but this one broke structure completely, because Lena had already spoken, and investigators made sure he knew that. Ellison didn't waste time. He placed a single statement in front of Evan. Typed, clear, signed. We took her to the property. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger, not shock. Something closer to realization. You want to correct anything? Evan leaned back, exhaled slowly. And for the first time since the investigation began, he stopped managing the conversation. She wasn't supposed to get involved. Not identical wording, but the same idea, which meant one thing. They weren't improvising anymore. They were remembering. Ellison moved forward. What happened when you got there? We just needed time to figure out what she had. Not Tara, not her safety, not what she wanted, what she had, what she knew. Evan described it simply, no dramatics, no emotion. She kept talking. That part didn't change, which meant it was real. She said she had copies of everything. That's where everything shifts, because now removing Tara doesn't remove the threat, it multiplies it. Lena didn't believe her at first. Pause. I did. Because belief changes behavior. If Evan believed Tara had backups, then the situation was already beyond control. Ellison asked the question directly. Did you hurt her? Evan didn't hesitate. No. He added something, not at first. Because now the timeline inside the property becomes clear. Tara is brought in alive. She continues speaking. She introduces a new risk, the copies. Tension builds, control begins to break. Evan's voice lowered slightly. She tried to leave. At some point, restraint failed, or wasn't complete. She got up, she moved for the door. Everything before this was controlled, this wasn't. Lena blocked her. Silence filled the room, because this is where intention meets action. What did you do? I stopped her. But not vague either. How? Then, she fell. Accidental or not, that's the point where outcomes change. And after she fell? Lower now, more distant. She wasn't moving right. Injury, possibly severe, possibly fatal. Ellison didn't soften it. Was she alive? A pause then, for a little while. At that moment, the case shifts from disappearance to death. Ellison continued. What did you do after? We had to move her. The staged shoe, the phone ping, the misdirection. Where? Because this answer ends the search. Past the ridge, near the old water line. Remote, unmonitored, difficult terrain. Tara is taken, confronted, injured during attempted escape, remains alive briefly, then transported again, and left in a place designed not to be found. Within hours, a search unit was deployed. coordinates mapped from Evan's description, grid pattern established. And by late afternoon, they found something. Not the body, not immediately, but something else. A second shoe. Now there was no doubt. They were in the right place. 15 feet beyond the trail line, partially concealed by natural overgrowth. They found her, 15 years old. The girl they called Trouble, not cleanly, not completely, but conclusively, because even with the truth known, one question still lingers. Because the recordings showed movement, devices, data, something organized, something deliberate, and something that didn't end with Tara. Tara Lennox wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was in the right place at the worst possible moment. And what she saw was never meant to be seen at all. By the time Tara Lennox was found, Ridgewater had already changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because once a truth like that surfaces, it doesn't leave quietly. The charges came quickly. Not because the system moved fast, but because the evidence didn't leave room for delay. Against Evan Rourke, unlawful detention, obstruction, involvement in fatal harm. Against Lena Caldwell, coordination of the operation, unlawful detention, direct involvement in the events leading to Tara's death. But those were just the visible charges, the surface, because underneath all of it, there was still the question Tara never got to answer. For weeks, investigators expanded beyond the disappearance. They traced device movements, digital storage trails, anonymous transfers, and the pattern Tara had been documenting. What they uncovered wasn't random, and it wasn't small. Lena wasn't just organizing meetings. She was managing a localized network of data movement, unregistered devices, temporary storage units, encrypted files passed physically instead of digitally to avoid detection. Evan wasn't the architect. He was the courier, chosen because he blended in. No suspicion, no attention, just movement, back and forth, carrying pieces of something larger. What was in the files? That part never became fully public, but fragments revealed enough to understand the risk. Private records, unauthorized data collections, and materials that were never meant to leave controlled systems. Not just illegal, dangerous. Tara didn't understand the full scope, but she understood enough to know something wasn't right. When investigators searched her tablet more deeply, they found what Lena and Evan feared most: hidden backups, stored in multiple locations, timed uploads. Tara hadn't just recorded what she saw. She had prepared for what might happen if she was discovered, even if she had walked away that day. The truth was already moving beyond her. The courtroom didn't need dramatics, because the facts carried enough weight. He claimed he didn't intend to harm her. He acted under pressure. The situation escalated beyond control. She tried to separate herself, to position Evan as the one who acted. But the structure of the operation and her role in it couldn't be separated from the outcome. Both were found guilty, not just for what they did, but for the sequence they created. The decisions that led, step by step, to a point where Tara didn't make it out. The town didn't return to normal, because normal had been built on assumptions, and those assumptions were gone. 15 years old, not trouble, not a problem, not what they called her. She was observant, careful, and brave enough to keep looking, even when she realized she shouldn't. Tara wasn't taken because she did something wrong. She was taken because she noticed something right. In stories like this, people often ask the same question: how does something like this happen? But the better question is this: how many moments were there where it could have stopped, but didn't? Because Tara Lennox's story wasn't one moment. It was a chain, a sequence, a pattern. And once it started, no one broke it in time.